The Blue Jackets get their revenge, splitting a home-and-home with the Maple Leafs. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena. The Maple Leafs coming up short against the Columbus Blue Jackets, losing 4-3 on the second night of a back-to-back. And Dave, this one was all about that second period for the Maple Leafs and the Blue Jackets, as Toronto led 2-0 after 20 minutes of action, but the Blue Jackets scoring 3 goals in that second period, which historically, this season has been the Leafs' best, but the Leafs and Blue Jackets would trade goals in the third period, and Columbus hangs on for the 4-3 win. It's sort of the same old song and dance, I think, in a lot of people's eyes, that you've got the worst team in the NHL coming into your barn, second half of a back-to-back, I know, but you manhandled them the night before, and after getting a 2-0 lead, it seemed like the Leafs took their foot off the gas.
Yeah, and look, what did you say yesterday, that in this string of 4 games, that 3 out of 4 would be a good result? Well, now that's the best that the Leafs can do in terms of points after dropping this one. And it's funny. I remember even talking to some Blue Jackets staff where they were kind of like, they know the tank mode's in, but when they come to Toronto, everyone wants to have a good showing. And certainly if the Leafs show any sort of inkling of putting their foot off the gas a bit, teams like the Jackets will do this to them. And it just leaves more questions than answers, and kind of the same old story again, which is this team just comes up with these type of games where at some point or another, they don't have the killer instinct to kind of separate this one. They had a 2-0 lead. They really could have just put the dagger in early. They let Columbus hang around. I thought they kind of let Columbus hang around yesterday as well, but at least finally created some separation in the third period. And Rob, it's not even just the second period. I mean, that's where the goals mostly came from, but they went from the Leafs went from 42% expected goals in the second period to 28 in the third. There was just no fight, no pushback, nothing that really kind of made you think that the Leafs are going to try and at least come out with some points in this. Like late, I expected to see, more pressure at Columbus's net, and that just didn't happen. And to me, that's probably the more puzzling thing out of all of this.
Yeah, and I feel like we've had to say this several times this year, because there have been some pretty terrible losses for the Maple Leafs against some really bad teams, whether it's in Arizona, whether it's in Montreal, Anaheim. You add Columbus to this list, but the reality is, on any given night, bad teams beat good teams. I mean, the Columbus Blue Jackets have, 16 wins on the season? So they've beat other teams before. It's not as if this is their first win of the season. I think of the other night. I mean, I think San Jose beat Tampa Bay, as an example. And everybody thinks of Tampa Bay as this, juggernaut that never budges against bad teams. They crush everyone. Well, that's not the reality. But I just think in a situation where you've got a 2-0 lead against the worst team in the league, you got to shut this down. And for the Leafs to come out in that second period and give up 21 shots on goal, I can only imagine what was going through Sheldon Keefe's head watching all that unfold. We'll hear from him coming up later, but let's begin with Morgan Rielly, who did have one of the Maple Leafs goals tonight. In fact, he was the first Maple Leafs defenseman to score on the power play this year. He says the team let their foot off the gas.
No, I think it's just, about this group in between periods being ready to go out and play well to start the second. That's important for us. It's an area of focus to be good at the start of periods, all 3. And when you're not, that's what happens.
Yeah, and that's definitely what happened there. And it just seemed to be sort of like a tidal wave. The Columbus Blue Jackets get that first goal from Boone Jenner, and then the Leafs were really never able to get the momentum back. I mean, maybe it's the second half of a back-to-back. You want to use that excuse that, they're traveling home, but Columbus is traveling to Toronto as well. Like, they looked slow for a large part of that second period. It could have been the fact that they maybe were on the PK a little bit. They had some extended shifts in their own end, and then, the bench gets tired over that period. But, Columbus was just outworking them, outskating them in that second period. And I thought it was super surprising because, in that first period, it was sort of the complete opposite. The Leafs really jumped on Columbus, and it looked like Columbus was sort of, going through the motions. And I thought, okay, this is going to be like a 5-1, 6-2 type of game for the Leafs. But Columbus really turned things on its head in the second period. And as you mentioned, in the third, the Leafs just couldn't find any footing. Morgan Rielly gets that power play goal to tie it up at threes, but Columbus comes right back with a really strong shift, and they eventually get that goal from Kent Johnson to take the lead. But, it's just not something you'll want to see at any point in the season, but especially now when, as we said, you're looking for some points against these bottom feeders in the NHL.
Yeah, and look, I mean, you made that reference that, good teams beat bad teams, and that's all well and good. I think what brings up a lot of the frustration is that the Maple Leafs are trying to show improvement, that they are among the best teams, or like could at least have a chance in chasing down Boston, or could be one of the best teams overall. And so when these kind of issues happen against some of these lower teams, it just seems to be a little bit more frequent than maybe some other teams. And because they just don't have the benefit of the doubt, given their recent experience in the playoffs, it all compounds, right? So that's probably where a lot of that goes there. And I think there's this push from a fan base that's just trying to kind of sift through all these regular season games, which are, let's be real, going to be somewhat telling, but not really, because we kind of know where this is going come April. And they're just wanting to get clues from all of this to see, does this team have enough? Does this team need to pick up a lot of pieces at the deadline? Or is what I'm seeing on a night like this going to rear its ugly head come playoff time against one of the better teams in the league? So, yeah, it's a tough one. The other puzzling thing is, even afterwards, yeah, maybe they were tired, but so was Columbus. Like the same team had the same break, also traveling to the same city, and somehow were able to kind of take what really was a pretty crappy first period and turn that into flipping the script in the second and third period, as good road teams do. Not saying they're a good road team, but I mean, that's what Toronto did on them yesterday. And I guess that's what Columbus managed to do tonight. But yeah, these are not teams of equals here. And so I think the disappointing thing here is not that they just lost in regulation, or that they just lost to a better team, is that there wasn't really a push toward the end to kind of get that go-ahead goal, or at least force it to go into overtime to tie it. They kind of rolled into it. That's really kind of what I take away from this game, that they just kind of rolled to the end of the game and just kind of look sluggish.
So, speaking about that sluggishness, I do wonder. I did not, admittedly, check the amount of minutes after 40 minutes of how much time, guys like Mitch Marner and John Tavares were on the ice. But Mitch Marner played 28 minutes tonight on the second half of a back-to-back. And I know these guys are, tip-top professional athletes, and they have incredible training, and, they can do superb things physically and athletically that not normal people can do. But, at what point is it sort of, you're looking at the bigger picture of this season, and sure, it's a 1-goal game against the Columbus Blue Jackets. You want to get these points, but playing Mitch Marner 28 minutes tonight seems like at some point it's sort of you're not really getting the benefit there, running that guy out there that much, that eventually he's going to get tired. I know he had an extended shift at one point. He was out there for 4 minutes when the Maple Leafs had the goalie out, or were looking for the game tying goal. But this has been a trend this year, where Sheldon Keefe has played Mitch Marner in all situations, and I just look at that tonight and I go, maybe he had to put Mitch Marner out there, but at what point is it sort of diminishing returns when the guy's almost pushing 30 minutes on the second half of a back-to-back?
I think it speaks a lot to, how little, not trust, but just it's not the same without Austin Matthews there in the top two lines. When there's a weakness there at center, one line is definitely going to get played a lot more than the other. And you see it. In even strength ice time, the Tavares line got 11 minutes, and the Kerfoot line, which is what you have to call it, even though it's Nylander is the star of that line, plays 8 minutes. That's a big difference. Usually there's more of an even split among lines 1 and 2. And I think, this kind of goes to my conversation with you yesterday about why I think center is really kind of where the Leafs need more depth, more trust, more of a balance. Even if a guy gets hurt, that there isn't this kind of drop off where you're kind of have to leaning on your other stars. So that could be a real problem here. Like that really could. So, looking at some of the footage, Austin Matthews looks like he's skating a lot more and could be coming back very soon based on some of the footage I saw from the very, very optional morning skate here in Toronto. But outside of that, when you don't have them, this is what happens. And for the most part, the Leafs have been able to skate away from this. But now, as this kind of goes along, I think you're starting to see the impact Austin Matthews had, even just away from his scoring ability, which is being more of the 200-foot player, why he was the MVP, that when you don't have him, you're kind of forced to lean on other stars a little bit more. And it's got to be dialed back. I think that speaks to also how little you trust the lines beyond that. There's inconsistency issues all over the place with this team outside of the core four at various times in the season, not consistently, but at times when it comes to matchups and things like that.
And it's not to say that the Maple Leafs, won't make an addition up front. We'll get to the trade chatter that surfaced prior to this game, or in the middle of this game, I should say, with regards to one of the bigger trade targets out there. But, I just look at this game tonight and, when the Leafs were down by 1 goal in the third period, they still, had some opportunities here. And I know William Nylander scored his 29th goal of the year in this one. Michael Bunting scored his 16th, but it just feels like, to have that one more game breaker or a guy that, you can get some scoring from, doesn't necessarily have to be secondary scoring, which I know everybody loves to talk about, but just another guy that can put the puck in the net. And, Boone Jenner, I think, is another guy that, I would look at. That'd be a really strong trade target if the Leafs could land him. Guy could play on a second line, could play in a third line as well. Like that's the type of player I think, would be really interesting with this lineup. But it's just a situation tonight where they weren't able to bust down the door in that third period and find that game tying goal after Columbus went back up. But a lot of tough minutes tonight for some very important players with the Toronto Maple Leafs. William Nylander, though, got the game going early on in that first period, scoring just 2:39 in. And I think the really bigger part of this story for this game for Nylander was the retaliation penalty that he took later in the game after fanning on a shot on a partial breakaway and then getting body checked shortly after. I think it was Nick Blankenberg of the Columbus Blue Jackets. But this is what Nylander had to say post-game about the retaliation penalty that he took.
I just think I shot the puck, and then a couple seconds later he tried to hit me, so I just got pissed off.
At him or at the missed opportunity?
No, at him, or probably both at the same time, but I didn't think he needed to hit me there.
Very out of character for William Nylander, who was definitely frustrated about that play overall. At first glance, it looked pretty bad that maybe he had chopped Nick Blankenberg in the mouth or in the head with his stick. But after initially getting a 5-minute major called by the officials, they reviewed it, of course, because you can do that now when it comes to major penalties. And very obvious that it was not as bad as it looked. But interesting to hear comments from head coach Sheldon Keefe as well, Dave, who was asked about the penalties just in general that his team took, including William Nylander's.
When's the last time you've seen Willie Nylander retaliate or something like that? I kind of like it, to be honest. They want to take runs at him every now and again. He's going to make the other team aware of it. But obviously in Bunt's situation, that's entirely different. That's something he's got to stay on that line.
So yeah, interesting to hear Sheldon Keefe obviously not happy with the Michael Bunting penalty, but kind of liked what he saw from Nylander there, who, we don't see that too often, where he gets heated really at all, because we have seen Willie Nylander. You've obviously been around him for a long time. He's a guy that's very even keel, doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. So clearly the frustration just kind of burst out in him in that moment. But what did you make of that Nylander, showed some emotion outside of scoring a goal tonight?
I think it's okay every now and then. I mean, you don't want it to be like what Sheldon Keefe talked about in Michael Bunting's situation, where it becomes a habit and then you start worrying about the guy kind of being a bit of a head case out there. So it's kind of funny, like how different Bunting and Nylander are in that regard, where Nylander usually doesn't react to anything like that. And that's usually something that can actually get under the skin of the opponents when you just no sell any sort of thing you do to a player, right? Like that's the consummate professional, the I'm in your head by not reacting to anything you do, you're nothing to me kind of response. So, I mean, every now and then it could be warranted that he takes it out and shows that kind of physical element to it. I think when Sheldon Keefe says he likes that, it's because, there's going to be times where he wants that to kind of show in the playoffs when things kind of get more intense and more physical. Obviously, you kind of have to keep things within reason. That looked, as you mentioned, really bad in real time, to the point where I actually had to edit one of my tweets about it, because I honestly thought he got a cross-check. I thought he cross-checked Blankenberg in the head, like in real time, because it just looked so bad. Blankenberg sold it pretty well as well. So that's a lot of why that looked pretty bad. And thank goodness for video review for those situations, because a 5-minute in a game would have certainly been harsh for something like that. But the intent was pretty bad. I wouldn't be surprised if the league does look at it, just because from an intent standpoint, it looked pretty bad. So, yeah, every now and then that's going to happen. If he can keeps it within reason and control it and take out his frustrations in situations that can change the momentum of a game, I think that's probably where the Leafs would prefer the seat outside of William Nylander. But there, where you kind of take away from your game more than you do add, it's probably not the best timing for something like that.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, it's kind of an interesting situation where William Nylander is a guy that, when he gets hit or somebody's face watching him in front of the net, he's pretty indifferent about it. And on the one hand, I think a lot of people are always, well, you got to stand up for yourself and you got to, do something so that, guys won't continue to do that. But the reality is, people know what Nylander's about. He's not that type of player. He's not a Michael Bunting or someone of that nature where, he's going to get back in your face. So, there is something sort of, I guess, cool about it, that you can sort of mess with the guy and he's not going to react, because at that point you don't even know if you're making a dent in him psychologically, right? It's like, okay, I keep doing all these things, but he's not doing anything. So it's like, is it really mattering if I continue to do them? So it was just very odd. Let's put it that way, to see William Nylander react the way that he did. But when it comes to Michael Bunting, and as we heard from Sheldon Keefe, there's a fine line of, at what point do you just become someone that, is taking unsportsmanlike penalties and costing your team in those situations. And this has been a sort of a topic of conversation, not only this year, but dating back to last season as well. Michael Bunting is someone that officials keep a close eye on, and, players of the other team do as well. And, he's clearly someone that is very good at drawing penalties. There's, definitely a skill to that. We always mention Nazem Kadri and how he was able to do that as a Toronto Maple Leaf. But, I think what was interesting on the ensuing play when he got out of the penalty box, it was likely a penalty that he took there, getting hooked down to the ice. But because of the reputation, because of what he did earlier in the game, he may have embellished it a little bit. He's not going to get the benefit of the doubt. So, how do you sort of, I guess, fix your reputation around the league with officials to get back in their good books? Like, are you sending gift baskets to the Wes McCaulleys and those officials, the Kevin Pollocks of the league? Or, you having sort of back channel conversations? Like, how do you right the ship if you're Michael Bunting and actually start to get calls?
It's actions and inaction. So the first step in a positive direction for Bunting in that regard was after he came out of the box for that that unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. He actually got dumped in the end boards pretty quickly after, and just even though the crowd booed, thought it should be a penalty, he actually didn't react. Like, he didn't look at anybody. He just skated off, and that was it. And that's what he needs to start doing on a consistent basis, because all the other showboating in front of the officials, like when he was waving his hand with the blood, when he was doing all different kinds of stuff before and looking and yelling and all that stuff, refs don't like it. They may not admit it. We don't hear from them, but you could talk to any retired official. They'll tell you that, the human element of that weighs in on it when you're managing a game, all that other stuff. I used to think early on, Austin Matthews had a bit of a same problem with showboating the officials, and he's curbed that quite considerably to the point where I don't think it's a problem for him anymore. With him, I'm talking about the situation where, remember, he got hooked by Jacob Chikrin. Funny you were mentioning Jacob Chikrin, because we're going to talk about him a bit later on. In that situation where he gets hooked and then Chikrin scores, and Matthews is yelling at the officials, and he's had a run-in with that same official in earlier games. That's what it's all about. It's just when these meetings happen, no incidents. Like, just you have to have no bulletin board material, nothing like that. That will kind of stick around, because nothing you can say to the officials is going to change anything. It's all going to be your actions and how you act on the ice and all that other stuff. And then over time, they'll start to not put those biases into their head.
Yeah, there's definitely a way to go about voicing your concerns. I think of baseball as a good example where, every baseball player questions the strike zone or, things like that. But
yeah,
Jose Bautista of the Toronto Blue Jays had a reputation as someone who, definitely should have gotten the benefit of the doubt because he had such an incredible eye at the plate, but was very, demonstrative about how he would go about those things, whether it's shaking his head, being very vocal about it, stepping out of the box, doing all of these different things. But, there are other guys around the league that, just kind of don't look at the umpire and just ask, where was that? And then, it's obviously a better way to go about it. And that's sort of the same thing. As you said, officials don't want to be shown up. If you want to talk to them about certain calls, there's a way to go about it. And right now, Michael Bunting is definitely in the doghouse with NHL referees. Maybe it's a situation where the coaching staff, maybe Sheldon Keefe has to pull him aside and say, look, I get it. This is kind of what you do and you need to play on the edge, but there's sort of a time and a place for these things and a way to go about them. So we need you to stay out of the box and not be in a spot where you're putting us down a man in a tight game here against Columbus. So I don't think it's going to be an issue moving forward, to be honest with you. Like, I think Michael Bunting is smart enough.
Sheldon's got to lead by example as well.
Yeah.
Sheldon's got to lead by example. There's been incidents with certain officials where you can just see it in GIFs and memes and everything, where there's just a lot going on. And so that's got to curb it. It was an issue with the Leafs last year. Remember, they did what other teams started doing by putting officials in their like the names of the officials on the bench so that they can address them by name and all that kind of stuff. Like they're working towards kind of smoothing that, but it goes beyond the players. Sheldon's got to also kind of keep his emotions in check, and he's admitted many times he's an emotional guy. And so I think he's got to learn to curb it at times too, because if you see your coach doing it, it gives a free pass to other guys too, and it's kind of hard to kind of keep that all, like, that message of toning it down when the coach is doing it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael Bunting is a very emotional player, as we've seen too. So, it's a lot of guys that need to sort of curb things a little bit. You can't just be as quiet as a church mouse and, let some of these things go. Because, we've talked a lot about officiating this year and how there have been some pretty horrendous calls that have gone against the Maple Leafs. Now, there's pretty horrendous calls that happen every single night in the NHL. So it's not only the Leafs that have issues with the officiating, but But right now, Michael Bunting, definitely, as we said, not in the good books with the officials around the NHL. All right, coming up, we'll get to the Bodog line of the day, as a lot of trade chatter going on right now with regards to Jacob Chychrun, who the Arizona Coyotes have decided to put in the press box due to trade-related reasons, which might be a new one. And we'll also talk about Joseph Woll, who made his season debut for the Maple Leafs in a losing cause as the Columbus Blue Jackets get the win on Saturday night, 4-3 over the Maple Leafs. You're listening to Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. It's Rinkwide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Naslund.
We weren't afraid of facing any line or any deep pairings because we knew that we would generate offense.
Bertuzzi.
I was like, I can play in this league and I can play a big role in this league and I can be dominant if all the stars align.
Morrison.
There was a confidence that we believed if we went out and played the way we were capable of, we could score every shift.
Their story in their words. Unreal West Coast Express. Available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The calendar's flipped to 2023. So what year was your company's website last upgraded? It's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit, so you can find out exactly how your website really stacks up against the competition. Your online presence has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
It is Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Scotiabank Arena. Columbus Blue Jackets picking up the 4-3 win over the Maple Leafs. Time for the Bodog line of the day, and if anybody at Bodog is listening, please take this request. Let's set a futures odds board, will we? Why don't we? For Jacob Chychrun, David, who does seem to be on his way out of Arizona. A lot of reports out there as far as, which teams may be interested. But I just would love to see an odds board as to who are the favorites right now, because the Maple Leafs are definitely a team in the mix. Edmonton has been rumored. The LA Kings are a team that's been rumored as well. But for people that missed it, in the middle of the Maple Leafs game, there was the tweet from the Arizona Coyotes saying that Jacob Chychrun would miss the game against St. Louis. He's being sat, if you will, for trade-related reasons, as, smart move by Arizona. If they feel like a trade might be in the works soon, you want this guy healthy, because if he's hurt, no one's going to want to deal for him. But as we heard on 32 Thoughts during Hockey Night in Canada's second intermission, Jeff Merrick saying that the Leafs, as far as what he had been hearing, were not one of the teams interested in Jacob Chychrun, neither the Oilers as well. No confirmation on the Kings, but at this point of the season, when the trade still hasn't been confirmed or completed, not sure how many teams are going to be like, oh yeah, we're the ones that are going to be making this deal right now. So whether there's smoke screens going on, whether there's just posturing, a lot of different things seem to be happening right now. But at the very least, with Arizona sitting Jacob Chychrun with a few weeks before the deadline, I don't know. It feels likely that he's on the move. What do you make of this?
Yeah, when have you ever seen the word trade-related reasons written out so transparently by a team in a tweet? I can't recall ever seeing anything like that. Usually, hockey teams, when they're doing some of that, or if they have to make some sort of roster announcement, they'll say held out for precautionary reasons, or some other interchangeable word, or non-injury related reasons to let people infer. They're not so blatant about the intent. So, but credit to them. They're being very transparent about the process. You almost feel like at this point he's got to get moved, because it just looks really bad if you sit someone out for trade related reasons and don't end up moving the guy. But yeah, a lot of teams are certainly interested, but it's a difficult proposition for Toronto because obviously assets kind of have to go back the other way. A first round pick would probably have to go back the other way because it's a guy with term, and you like your defense and in the way it's constructed right now. So if you're doing that, are you ready to kind of rejig what you've kind of got going in a pretty good situation right now? Because someone would have to be taken away from that top six, I believe, if you're going to pull off a move like that. Maybe not, but still, like to make the money work, there would have to be some sort of significant jump. So I don't know. For Toronto, it doesn't look like it's in the cards, but I could be wrong on that. It sounds like LA is probably the one where it's closest to probably happening in that regard, and they have the pieces and everything like that. I heard it suggested that the reason why LA is not going to go full bore or execute anything is a big night for Dustin Brown because they're retiring his number, and it would make sense for them to not want to do anything tonight to distract away from a guy who's won cups and was a former captain of your franchise having his big night. So I get it in that regard. So that kind of seems to make the most sense right now. And LA's a team with a West that's very much up for grabs, and that would be a huge move to make. And they've got pieces that they can do it. And the real concern at that point is if Jacob Chikrin can stay healthy, because health issues have been a lot with this guy. So we'll see what happens there.
I think it would have been great to have Jacob Chikrin come out and be the one to present Dustin Brown with whatever gift he was getting. I think that would have been
know if they could fly him out
cool way to. Yeah, that would have been a pretty cool way to announce a deal, I think. And here to present to you whatever is the newest member of the LA Kings, Jacob Chikrin, and he comes out and then he gives the gift
and then he
Dustin
says,
Brown.
"Great, this night's about you now." No, I'm just kidding.
This is Jacob Dustin Brown. This is your life. I think that's probably what they would do. Hosted by Jacob Chikrin, but he was definitely I shouldn't say was, because still I might end up being dealt to the Maple Leafs, but I think he is a big trade target favorite of a lot of Leafs Nation, because I think there's still a lot of Leafs fans that see the blue line as a massive area of need, and he would be an upgrade, no doubt. But with his age, being only 24, still being under contract for the next 2+ seasons at $4.6 million, I mean that's pretty juicy of a trade target.
A lot would have to go back.
Yeah, you would have to give up quite a bit. And at that point, I mean, if you're the Leafs, do you have enough to bring in, another impact player? It would be very difficult, I would say, at that point. But
I just don't see it making any sense. Like, why would you rejig and give up a lot of pieces for one guy for term in a year where I know you're not throwing everything at this year to go for it, but people want the Leafs to kind of really go for it and contend for a cup. So why would you facelift the team for one guy who also has a history of injuries? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
So one guy that I believe made his return tonight because he hasn't played for a while. He's been injured. Ryan O'Reilly scoring the overtime winner for the St. Louis Blues in a win over Jacob Chikrin's Arizona Coyotes. And that's a guy, of course, that I think a lot of people will be hot after if he is made available. You would think so. Vladimir Tarasenko, now a member of the New York Rangers. So it does seem like the St. Louis Blues are maybe trying to clean house a little bit here. And, that's a guy that is on an expiring deal. Of course, has won Stanley Cups, has that playoff pedigree. You mentioned Jonathan Taves yesterday as a target for the 3C spot on the Leafs. But, if you get Ryan O'Reilly, that's potentially your 2C, maybe. I don't know if you want to play him third line center.
2L.
2L potentially as well, a guy that can play on the wing. But, if he's healthy and is showing that he's good to go, I mean, that might be a guy that Kyle Dubas would be calling on quite frequently with St. Louis.
Yeah, it's quite possible. But you also have to remember the fact that even though St. Louis did trade Tarasenko, I do think there is a mutual interest to kind of figure out something where a long-term deal can be done to keep Ryan O'Reilly there. And so if that happens, I don't see a Doug Weight-like situation where he goes as a rental and then comes back to the team. That's certainly possible. You just don't see it as often anymore. Usually before that happens, you just try and figure out an extension and don't let it get to that point. So that is going to be a very interesting one. If I recall, that original deal wasn't even done by Doug Armstrong. I believe it was done by the Buffalo Sabres. And then I think it was a year into that deal is when he got moved to St. Louis, and it just seemed to kind of work out perfectly. So, um, yeah, like they both guys would have to kind of come to terms on a deal, figuring out each other for the first time in this situation. And so it was a big move for St. Louis to kind of make that, okay, we're going to give up this piece. But I mean, look at the haul, right? Like that's a lot of why they did it. And it was one of those things where it's like, we're on the fence, but if someone comes at us with something that improves our team significantly, then they're going to do it. And, Tarasenko came with a lot of baggage that I think it made sense for them to do it, where I don't think there was any sort of path to an extension. But with Ryan O'Reilly, there certainly seems to be a path and a mutual interest to an extension that would complicate any sort of rental move for the guy.
Yeah, and I think, as you touched on, him being a rental there, that sort of, contradicts what Kyle Dubas mentioned the other day, that, they wouldn't be looking to move, assets for a rental. Never say never, of course, but it would have to be, you would think a substantial piece and pieces that go to St. Louis to acquire a guy like Ryan O'Reilly, because there would be a pretty big bidding war, I think, if he is made available by St. Louis. So maybe that takes him out of the running for the Maple Leafs, but just another guy to keep an eye on come the trade deadline. But getting back to the Maple Leafs, tonight we saw the season debut of Joseph Woll, who made 36 saves in this one. There was a lot of, anticipation and a lot of hype coming into this game as to how he would look. I thought he had some decent moments. There wasn't much to be tested on in that first period. As we mentioned, Columbus registering just 4 shots on goal, but that second period, a lot busier for Joseph Woll. And, it's tough for a guy in that spot where, the first period, they've insulated him so well, the team's playing so hard. And then in the second period, as the goalie, you're there to be the last line of defense. But all of a sudden, when the team stops doing the things that they were doing in the first period, you really have to be at your best. And he unfortunately was not able to make enough stops there in that second period. But let's hear from the Maple Leafs netminder, who says at least this go around, he did not have as many jitters as he did in his rookie year.
Yeah, I felt good, a lot better than last year coming in and playing, for sure, a lot more comfortable. And yeah, I thought I trusted myself a lot more playing and settled in.
Yeah, he definitely settled in, and I don't think he necessarily gave up any bad goals, Dave. There was the one Sean Corrali goal where he thought he had the puck after a rebound and it was poked away from him, but, didn't think there were any stinkers that he necessarily gave up in this one. The Kent Johnson goal was tough because that puck's going wide of the net, and Johnson with a great redirect to give Columbus the lead. But, the stats, the newspaper box score doesn't look great for Joseph Woll, but I didn't think he was terrible in this game. Maybe that's too harsh of a word, but what did you make of his season debut?
Yeah, look, I mean, he gave up 4 goals, but he still had a save percentage of 900, which is not common for a goalie who gives up 4 goals, which also speaks to kind of how busy he ended up being in the second and third periods. I didn't even realize till the question was posed to him. I totally forgot this, but I guess in the 4 games that he played last year, they were all on the road. I didn't realize he hadn't had a single game here yet. So that was maybe a bit new for him, that he was actually making his home debut, home NHL debut in that regard. So there was a little bit of a different element there, but he looked very comfortable out there. I thought the way he kind of conducted himself and handled himself talking to us and not really blaming himself for anything is part and parcel to why he's had such a good year, that he doesn't seem to kind of get frustrated. And his body language was such that he continued to kind of look square and kind of shake things off and not really look like he was kind of getting caught up in any sort of moments. So from that, I thought there was good growth. And I think the Leafs should feel pretty confident in being able to use them again the next time they have a back-to-back situation, or if they choose to kind of spot him into another situation. Of course, Matt Murray is going to be out for the next little while, so I would imagine we're going to see Joseph Woll at least one more time, maybe 2. And just how he responds after this, I think, is going to be big. But look, I think Joseph Wall has the potential to be perhaps one of the goalies of the future, maybe graduate to a backup role if the Leafs decide that that's kind of in the cards from when they eventually figure out what they're going to do with their tandem beyond this season.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to get a sense of what you have in Joseph Wall. And, the second half of the back-to-back is tough. It's Columbus, but as we've mentioned a lot tonight, the Maple Leafs effort was just not there after the first 20 minutes in front of Joseph Wall. But, it's hard to, deny the numbers that he's put up in the AHL this year. I know it's the American Hockey League, but, one game does not really give you a whole sense of, what this guy could potentially be. And I've said it before that, lovely, sweet entry-level contract would look pretty good for the Maple Leafs right now because of their lack of cap space. And if he can be anything over the next few years, that would be massive if he can be a contributor at the NHL level, even as a backup. I mean, if he's the full-time backup next year, whether it's Matt Murray or Ilya Samsonov as the starting goaltender, that's just, so big to get that type of savings.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, look, the big one that's kind of hanging or looming over the Leafs right now is Matt Murray because he's often injured. He has a $4.875 million cap hit for next season as well. And so they really have to figure out what is their short-term future with this goaltender when he comes back from his ankle injury, because it's not a comfortable situation for the Leafs to be in right now, because this is what they were kind of warned about, and it's kind of rearing its ugly head. And the only reason it's not been a disaster, at least to this point, is because Ilya Samsonov has pulled his weight. Like, there's no question about it. $1.8 million. He was the best insurance policy to this gamble of Matt Murray, because I shudder to think where the Leafs would be right now if they didn't have someone like Ilya Samsonov performing at the rate that he is right now, with how often Matt Murray has been hurt. Even if you have other guys like Shalgren or Wall, they're just getting comfortable, but they're not there yet to kind of carry a bulk load of games. So this could have been really bad really quick, and then perhaps the shopping list for the Leafs at the deadline might have changed, but it hasn't. So this is what they've got going right now. And at some point, if Samsonov continues to play the way he is, then the conversation is going to have to be figured out as to if he has playoff success. And then at that point, what's it going to cost to keep him? He's an RFA, but certainly that AAV would go up on the next deal for sure.
Yeah, it definitely would if he continues to go this way. And if he has any sort of playoff success, that number will only continue to increase for a guy like Ilya Samsonov. But, I think at some point you get to a spot where that number just doesn't make any sense anymore. We're starting to see it around the NHL where teams are pretty hesitant to give big money deals to, non-elite goaltenders, if you want to put it that way. I mean, the Andrei Vasilevskis and the Igor Shesterkins of the world, the Connor Hellebuycks, like those guys definitely deserve the big tickets that they have. And maybe Samsonov works his way up there. I mean, the numbers this year have been definitely
that's what he's targeting, right?
Type of stats. That's what he's targeting.
Yeah.
But just from a team, risk, right? Like, with goalies, you just never know. Guys could all of a sudden turn into a pumpkin, and then you're saddled with, a 5-year deal at $6.5-7 million.
You
not
could
that
also,
high, but
right.
you look at.
You could also turn into
Jack Campbell,
Ottinger.
right? I know he's turned it. Yeah, you could turn into Jake Ottinger for sure. But, I know he's turned it around a lot here. But, Jack Campbell, like there's an example where that guy's saddled in for, 5 years at 5. And it's been better lately. But at least the first few months was an absolute train wreck. So that is the risk that you take when you decide to invest in goalies long term.
Sure.
Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're bad, and you just hope you've, got the goalie on the right side of the variance.
No, for sure. And I mean, it speaks loudly that Stuart Skinner was an NHL All-Star this year, representing the Pacific Division as an Edmonton Oiler, as a goaltender. So it kind of spoke to where Jack Campbell's game was up until that point. And it seems like post All-Star or even just before post All-Star, his game was turning around, just like how before All-Star last year is when his game started going south. So it's all kind of evening out in the wash for Jack Campbell. But as you mentioned, evening out in the wash is not helpful to a team either when it comes to a goaltender, because you just don't know what you're going to get on a given week, and that's not helpful either.
Yeah, you want to have consistency when you're paying your goaltender $5 million a season to be the starter. But the Maple Leafs...
Look at LA's situation.
Yeah, that's rough.
They have, they also have a goaltender that they paid $5 million per, and they had to waive him. So, and they just signed Phoenix Copley to a deal because he's proved to be a better backup right now.
Yeah, it's never easy trying to find consistency with goaltending. You know, the Maple Leafs coming into the season, as you said, a lot of people question, what is Kyle Dubas doing with Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov? And, you know, I know Murray's hurt right now, but he had a really strong stretch where it was pretty obvious that he was a nice pickup, and Samsonov all season long has been really consistent for the most part and really strong. So go figure, the 1 year where people question what is Kyle Dubas doing with the goaltending might be, you know, one of the better years of goaltending the Maple Leafs have had in quite some time. But I guess we'll get a look at Joseph Woll again next weekend if Matt Murray is not able to make it back, as the Maple Leafs will have a back-to-back against the Montreal Canadiens and then Chicago Blackhawks on Saturday and Sunday. But the Blackhawks will be the next opponents coming up on Wednesday, which will be the next Rink-Wide Toronto post-game show. It's a 7 p.m. Eastern puck drop down at Scotiabank Arena. But just a quick aside for people that are going to have some free time before the Super Bowl, Dave, on Sunday, that are in the GTA. The Leafs are going to have their public outdoor practice. It's been a couple of years, of course, with COVID, but the Leafs will be returning to lovely Nathan Phillips Square. I live pretty close there, not to dox myself and let people know my location of where I live, but just know that it's a place that I can get to, but I might go check it out. I mean, it's always a pretty cool atmosphere when you can see NHL players for free practice and skate outside, and I'm sure it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, I'm going to go there. There is going to be a brief availability, so I'm going to go there to fulfill my Toronto Maple Leafs reporter duties as per usual. And it's funny because I wasn't covering the team when they did this the last couple times, and before that the tradition used to be part of their charity to kind of go to random outdoor rinks across the city and refurbish those rinks. So I don't know if they've just finished doing that, and so they've turned that into Nathan Phillips Square always now. It's obviously not a great outdoor rink setup because it's not hockey dimensions, or there's not really going to be anything fundamental about the practice for sure, but it's a good community event, and it's a way for fans to go see them up close for free. Get there early. That's been the big warning, because it's first come, first serve.
Yeah, I don't know how early I'll be wanting to get up to go check it out, but as you said, it might be tough to find a spot in the stands to get a good vantage point. But should be a fun time for all the people that head out there on Sunday to check out the Maple Leafs public practice at Nathan Phillips Square. That'll do it for this edition of Rink-Wide Toronto Post Game. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can follow us on the Twitter machine, Rink-Wide TOR, at DAlter, and at RobWong34. And you can always get the podcast at rinkwidetoronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Hey, it's Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. And Ray, we're into the second half of the NHL season, and the trade deadline is obviously getting closer. Every night, wins and losses are starting to mean more as teams try to stay in the mix in the standings to secure that playoff spot. And man, some teams could use some help before the deadline. Yeah, we've got the storylines, trade rumblings all covered, along with the top hockey guests twice weekly, right here on the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get podcasts.